Scotland is, of course, known to have lots of large bumps, but most people don't seem to realize that we also have some caves as well. Now, contrary to expectations, in fact, there are a vast number of caves in Scotland, and they embrace a great variety of rock types and topography. Most of them, of course, are littoral or sea caves or on raised beaches, and they're of limited appeal except to archaeologists, who have, in fact, found evidence of occupation from the Neolithic right almost to the present day. Indeed, it is the impression of some people that Scots still behave as though they live in caves. Evidence of ritual or casual temporary use of limestone caves comes from the Craignanuave bone caves in Assynt. Cleves Cove is a little maze cave in Ayrshire, and High Pasture Cave in Skye, amongst others. Exploration, though, comes later in the historical record. Internecine warfare amongst the Scottish clans, particularly in the Western Isles, led to a large number of incidents, such as driving villagers into caves and setting fire to entrance blockages. Aye, see you, Jimmy, this will keep you warm, you know. And that is, in fact, Massacre Cave on the Isle of Egg, which is where that very thing happened. Early recording also appears quite early on in the 16th century. For instance, Timothy Pont recorded quite a few well-known caverns on some of his maps. During the Enlightenment, dilettante investigation commenced with such luminaries as the Reverend Richard Pocock, William Daniell, and this chap, Sir Walter Scott, who was an inveterate visitor to Scottish caves, and in fact, he made some of the best descriptions of some of the well-known caves, such as Spa Cave on Skye and Smoo Cave right up in the far north in Durness. Some of the best and most entertaining accounts of caving ever written about Scotland. However, scientific work, and I use that in quotes, started at the end of the 19th century, and this chap, Professor Matthew Heddle, deserves special mention for his florid accounts of Scottish caves, and I have to read this to you. I have read it to cavers before, but it's just so wonderful. I cannot believe that people haven't really enjoyed this. It's a description of the water slide in the Craignanuave system in Assynt. This guy looks fairly serious, doesn't he? But listen to this. For short space, the waters of a limpid stream quietly glide between softly swarded banks, suddenly to be precipitated into the abysses of a gaping chasm. The horrors of that yawning gulf seem only the more horrible from the elastic softness of the green mantle which creeps to the very verge of its treacherous lips. Any of the ladies swooning yet? Short shrift to him beneath whose incautious feet that verge crumbles. Jagged projection and alternately protruding buttress would unjoint him piecemeal as he shot from the bright reflection of limestone effulgence through the grey gloom of middle distance to plunge into a blackness of darkness which looks solid in those far-off depths. People don't write like that anymore, unfortunately. However, serious study really began with this pair of chaps, Peach and Horn, who have done really the seminal work on sorting out the geology of northwest Scotland. And their observations led to the excavation of the Craignanuave bone caves. Assynt, for those who don't know Scotland too well, is at about, if you regard Britain as a clock, they're about 10 to 11 o'clock. They're up in that corner of the globe. And the first excavations of these bone caves also led to the first assessment as to why and how the caves formed in the district at all. They were formed in Cambrian dollarstones, which is quite an old formation. And you may have read, some of you recently, about the account where about 2 or 3 billion years ago, a meteorite struck the middle of Scotland, and the damage it did to the substructure of the Earth is thought by Trevor Faulkner, amongst others, to have been instrumental many millions of years later for the whole nap of Cambrian dolostone moving west, being facilitated by fractures made by the meteorite. And that is why in the Ascent region you've got such a discontinuity. You've got rocks, older rocks above younger rocks above older rocks. It's very difficult to sort out. These two gentlemen are really responsible. And then in the interwar period and immediately after World War II, I hate to say this, but English cavers began to show an interest, and some prominent speleologists braved the terrible single-track roads to the far north, and servicemen who were cavers also who were based there during the war, they did some visits as well. And from 1947, Sheffield University Mountaineering Club caving section, there's a mouthful for you, usually inspired under the direction of the late Trevor Ford, they began a series, a series of explorations up in Ascent. This is one of the pictures taken between, I don't know exactly when, 1947 or 49, in the Altman-Wave Stream Cave, which unfortunately has the initials ANUS, so it's usually called Anus Cave. Get to the bottom. Anyway, after about 2 or 3 years of expeditions, and they were expeditions in those days, some of the people used to get the train as far as somewhere like Leg or Garve, and then a bicycle on what were called roads, but were really rubble heaps, some of them. It was really quite a remote place to get to. In 1959, Trevor Ford published the seminal work on the Sutherland caves, which really inspired people in Scotland to turn their attention to what's on their home ground. There were, therefore, native cavers being encouraged, mainly, I must say, from Ferrantes, who had a big engineering establishment in Edinburgh, and one of the chaps who looked after the apprentices was very keen on outdoor pursuits. Alan Evans, his name was, and he used to take small groups up to Sutherland as well. But as a result of reading about all this, I was inspired in 1961 to form the Grampian Speleological group, and there I am looking, as Sid was showing earlier, the full Monty there, the goon suit, the rubber gloves, the boiler suit, the pulp hat, and the knife cell, the full 9 yards. I bet you won't remember this, actually, but I first went caving with Sid Peru with the BSA around 1960, I think. Anyway, I decided that we would pursue our explorations, particularly in Scotland, and that's why I called my club, I called it the Grampian Speleological Group because it sounded Scottish, rather than the Edinburgh Caving Club. I didn't want it to be parochial, I wanted it to embrace the whole country. And I met up shortly afterwards with this gentleman who's called Jim Salvona, who is without doubt the walking encyclopedia. He has caved in every single hole, I think, that's ever been found in Scotland, and that includes souterrains, mines, caves, everything. He's about 87, he's about 87 now. Still comes down to the pub on a Tuesday. So a remarkable gentleman who's been caving since about 1954, 55, I think. At almost the same time, i.e. in the 1960s, there was a Glasgow Speleological Society, which was very much an industrial archaeology club to start with. They were really interested in mines, although it did change after a while into a kind of caving club. There was also, as you will note if you have got copies of British Caving, the 1953 or 62 edition of that book, a Paisley Troglodytes Club. But this, in fact, was the name of a a Paisley drinking club from the 19th century, rather than mind you, there's not much difference, really, is there? Anyway, that's where all the examination of all the various regions in Scotland really took off. I apologize for this, because I seem to have deleted my proper map, so I had to just photograph something on paper. But our principal caving areas are Western Argyll, where it says Appin up there, Round Schiehallion in Perthshire, which is in the centre of the map, there in Schiehallion, you've got beautiful Blair Athol limestones, which are without doubt, I'm not quite sure what age they are, but they're absolutely beautiful limestones. They're a pale, sparkly grey with a tinge of green in them, and they're just delightful. Right up the far north, we have the Isle of Skye, we have Kishhorn, and we have Applecross, and then we have Assynt, which is our principal caving area, and right at the very top, we have Durness, which looks bigger than it is, really. But the Jurassic limestones, these are all Cambrian limestones that run down the top half of Scotland, apart from Applecross and a little bit of Skye, where there are some Jurassic limestones, where there are some incredibly well-decorated caverns. I think it must be something to do with the chemistry, either the lack of or the addition of more magnesium. I'm not quite sure why that is, because most Scottish caves do not have a spectacular amount of stalactite in the hole. And there's very little verticality in Scotland, apart from a few small potholes in the Appin area of Argyll. So explorations may be carried out without being encumbered by half of the British industrial system hanging about your body. And I must mention, by the way, here, the efforts made by the Mouldiwarps Speleo group from the Northern Dales, who in the 1970s explored probably more caves than anybody else on the Isle of Skye in a series of campaigns. There are minuscule outbreaks of limestone in other parts of the country as well, including, as I said before, the little maze cave down here at Cleves Cove. This was excavated by a local in 1883. It was almost full to the roof, and it was found to have quite rich archaeological remains. Having been warned by the owner that he can dig the cave, but didn't set fire to it. Thank you. We've got deep caves. That's incidentally a pitch in Argyll in the Cave of the Skulls. We've got other caves. Oh, no, I should have missed out all these. That's Warvan Clawanite, which is currently Scotland's biggest cave. That's up in Sutherland. That's about 3 kilometres at the moment. And this is a picture which you saw at the beginning of one of the caves in Applecross, which has such beautiful formations in it. And that's Cleves Cove, where you can see a little trench forming in the floor there. We have a lot of fissure caves formed in microschist. Yes, deep examples can be found in the Arachar Alps, and also, as this one is, on the Isle of Raasay. They're quite dangerous, some of these, because they're only a few feet wide, and it can be up to 50 meters deep. Of course, we have these things on Schiehallion. They're all very small. I and other first-timers there deserve a medal, I think, for suffering hordes of flies, the coldest groundwater I've ever encountered, and being cut to shreds by the razor-sharp limestone. We've also had a success recently in Applecross with the discovery of a new system, which has just won the Mendip J-Rat Digging Award. Yeah, beauty. To get to the upper part of the new cave required some calisthenics, so there's about a 40-foot drop of chossy rock below the climber there. So we do have to resort to technicalities sometimes, or not all the time, though. Sometimes you don't need any kit at all. Some caves have been extended by cave diving. We have to thank the likes of Tony Boycott and Martin Farr for kick-starting diving in Sutherland. This is a shot of Sump 7 in Clawanite. It's gone down to Sump 8 now, where Simon, who was giving the talk on Derbyshire, recently, well, has been digging in there, but it's an underwater boulder choke, not very good. So I'm rattling on here. But what we did find in Clawanite was an almost complete bear skeleton, which has been removed to the Royal Museum of Scotland. That's where that was found, and the previous skull as well. They date now from about 15,000 to 45,000 years before present. So there's quite a spread of assemblage of bones there still to be found, I think. And surprisingly, there have been few caving clubs, quite a few caving clubs north of the border since the 1960s. Most of them died after a few years, or they were absorbed into the bigger clubs with the Black Widow effect. Presently, I think there's only ourselves who act as a de facto national club, I suppose, and a group called GUPA, which stands for the Glasgow University Potholing Association, which amalgamates all the students there. We possess probably the highest limestone cave in the UK, certainly some of the oldest in the Cambrian dollarstones, a record number of sea caves, and a handful of internationally known show caves, such as Fingals, Smoo Cave on Skye, and innumerable Wallace and Bruce caves, and arguably Cannibal Sawney Beans Cave as well. All this work is published by us in a biannual journal, and also in regional guides. It's almost a national caving journal, really. So the GSG have finally become a sort of one-stop shop for all the official side if they want to consult us on widening the A9, for example. Are there any caves under it, and so on. So the future looks bright. We've got plenty of opportunities for scientific research. Several English universities have done work up there, but there's plenty more to be done. There's a load of archaeological stuff going on. The little Jeanie Barry's cave near Edinburgh, which is in sort of calcited conglomerate, I think that could do with some study by somebody. And biological work it's an open field, so feel free to come up and do so. All in all, then, there's everything to play for. I will now exit to the faint sound of bagpipes. Thank you.